marked by the wild hunt. Evan Corbin had always ignored the silver cuffs that encircled her wrists, a family heirloom that had no key. But on the night of the wolf moon, the metal burned. The pain sent her to her knees, the scent of scorched iron thick in the air. And then she heard the knock at her door, slow, deliberate. When she opened it, he stood in the moonlight, golden eyes fixed on the cuffs with something close to recognition. "It was never meant to break," he murmured. "And now they'll come for you." Chapter 1. The Burning Moon's Omen. The wind carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves, a melancholic perfume that always settled over the small town of Havenwood as October drew to a close. Evan Corbin, a woman who carried her 58 years with a quiet grace that belied the storms within, stood at her kitchen window, watching the last crimson streaks of sunset fade into a bruised purple. The full moon, swollen and luminous, was already rising, casting an ethereal glow over the gnarled branches of the ancient oak in her backyard. It was the wolf moon, the locals called it, a name that always sent a shiver of unease down Evan's spine, a feeling she'd never been able to explain. She touched the cool, smooth silver of the cuffs that encircled her wrists. They were wide, intricate things, etched with swirling patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in the changing light. Family heirlooms, her grandmother had called them, passed down through generations of Corbin women. Evan had worn them since she was a child, never questioning their presence, never able to remove them. There was no clasp, no key, no visible way to take them off. They were simply there, a part of her, as familiar as her own skin. Tonight, though, they felt different. A subtle warmth, almost imperceptible at first, began to emanate from the metal. Evan frowned, rubbing her wrist with her thumb, trying to dispel the sensation. It was probably just the cold, she reasoned, the damp chill that seeped into the old house despite her best efforts to keep it warm. She turned away from the window, busying herself with the mundane tasks of preparing dinner, a solitary meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, a routine that had become both a comfort and a cage in the years since her husband, Thomas, had passed. The warmth intensified. It was no longer subtle, but a persistent, throbbing heat that spread from her wrists up her arms. Evan gasped, dropping the paring knife she was holding. It clattered against the ceramic tile floor, the sharp sound echoing in the sudden, unnerving silence of the house. The scent of wood smoke and leaves was gone, replaced by something metallic, acrid, like scorched iron. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the haze of her everyday anxieties. She stared at the cuffs, her breath catching in her throat. The silver was glowing, a faint, pulsating light that seemed to emanate from within the intricate designs. The heat was unbearable now, a searing pain that made her cry out. She stumbled back, knocking against the kitchen table, her hands flying to her wrists, trying to pull the cuffs off, a futile, desperate gesture. She sank to her knees, the pain overwhelming, a roaring in her ears that drowned out the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the sweat that beaded on her forehead. This wasn't just the cold. This wasn't just her imagination. Something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. Just as she thought she might faint from the agony, the pain subsided, leaving a lingering, tingling warmth and the lingering, unsettling smell of burnt metal. Evan remained on the floor, her body trembling, her mind reeling. She looked at her wrists, expecting to see charred flesh, burns, some visible sign of the torment she had just endured. But the skin was unmarked, the silver cuffs gleaming innocently in the moonlight that streamed through the window. Then she heard it. A knock at the door. Slow, deliberate, 3 distinct raps that echoed through the silent house like a death knell. Every instinct screamed at her to stay where she was, to hide, to pretend she wasn't home. But a strange, compelling force drew her to her feet. It felt as if an invisible thread was pulling her towards the door, a thread connected to the silver cuffs, to the burning moon, to something ancient and unknown. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. The wood was cold beneath her fingertips, a stark contrast to the lingering warmth of the cuffs. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. What if it was a burglar? A stranger? Or something worse? She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and pulled the door open. He stood there, bathed in the silvery light of the wolf moon, a figure seemingly sculpted from the shadows themselves. He was tall, powerfully built, with a presence that filled the small porch and seemed to press against Evan, stealing the air from her lungs. His hair was the color of midnight, falling in thick waves around a face that was both strikingly handsome and deeply unsettling. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were golden, luminous, with an intensity that seemed to pierce through her, seeing past her carefully constructed defenses, straight into the core of her being. And those eyes, those impossible, golden eyes, were fixed not on her face, but on the silver cuffs that encircled her wrists. He didn't speak at first, simply stood there, studying the cuffs with an expression that Evan couldn't quite decipher. It was a mixture of recognition, surprise, and something else, something that looked almost like sorrow. Finally, he lifted his gaze to meet hers, and the intensity of his stare made her take an involuntary step back. His voice, when he spoke, was low and resonant, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. It was never meant to break, he murmured, his voice carrying a weight of ages, a hint of something ancient and powerful. And now they'll come for you. The fear returned full force, washing the courage that drew her here in an instant. What did that even mean? Chapter 2. Echoes of an Ancient Pact. Evan stared at the stranger, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. They'll come for you. The words echoed in her mind, chilling her to the bone. Who? She managed to whisper, her voice barely audible above the frantic beating of her heart. Who will come for me? What are you talking about? The man didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer, his presence filling the doorway, the scent of pine needles and something wilder, something untamed, clinging to him like a second skin. Evan instinctively recoiled, her back pressing against the doorframe. She felt a primal urge to flee, to slam the door shut and lock herself away from this unsettling stranger and the strange, dangerous aura that surrounded him. He seemed to sense her fear, and a flicker of something that might have been regret crossed his features. I apologize, he said, his voice softening slightly, though it still retained that deep, resonant quality. I didn't mean to frighten you, but there is little time for pleasantries. My name is Reese, and you, Evan Corbin, are in grave danger. He knew her name. That simple fact sent another wave of unease through her. How could he possibly know her name? She had never seen him before in her life. Havenwood was a small town. She knew everyone, or at least, she thought she did. How do you know my name? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Reese gestured towards her wrists, towards the silver cuffs that still felt warm against her skin. Those, he said, his golden eyes fixated on the intricate metalwork. They are more than just heirlooms, Evan. They are a symbol, a binding, a mark. A mark? Evan repeated, her confusion deepening. A mark of what? He hesitated, his gaze shifting from the cuffs to her face, his expression unreadable. Of a pact, he finally said, his voice low and heavy. An ancient pact made between your ancestors and mine. Evan frowned, trying to make sense of his words. An ancient pact? Her ancestors? It sounded like something out of a Gothic novel, not real life. She had always considered herself a practical woman, grounded in reality. The stories her grandmother used to tell, the whispers of magic and mystery that clung to the Corbin family history, she had always dismissed them as folklore, as fanciful tales meant to entertain a child. I don't understand, she said, shaking her head. What pact? What are you talking about? Reese sighed, running a hand through his thick, dark hair. The gesture was surprisingly human, a flicker of vulnerability in his otherwise imposing demeanor. It's a long story, he said. A complicated one, and one that is best told elsewhere. He glanced around, his eyes scanning the quiet street, the darkened houses, the moonlit trees. This is not a safe place to talk. Evan followed his gaze, suddenly aware of how exposed she was, standing on her porch, bathed in the eerie glow of the wolf moon. A shiver ran down her spine, a feeling of being watched, of being hunted. Where should we go? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rhys looked back at her, his golden eyes holding hers captive. There's a place, he said. A place where we can talk, where you will be safe.
For now.
He extended a hand towards her, an offer, a plea, a silent promise. Evana hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run back inside and lock the door. But there was something in his eyes, something in his voice, that compelled her to trust him, against all reason. It was a strange, unsettling feeling, a pull that seemed to emanate from the very depths of her soul. It was as if the silver cuffs on her wrists were somehow connected to him, to this ancient pact he spoke of, to a destiny she had never known existed. She looked at his outstretched hand, at the strong, calloused fingers, the faint scars that hinted at a life lived on the edge, a life far removed from her own quiet, predictable existence. And then, she looked back at his eyes, those golden, luminous eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, surprisingly gentle. A jolt of energy, like a static shock, passed between them, and Evana gasped, her eyes widening in surprise. The warmth in the silver cuffs intensified, a pulsing heat that mirrored the strange, unfamiliar rhythm of her own heart. He didn't say anything, simply gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, and then he turned and led her away from the only home she had ever known, into the moonlit night, towards a destiny she could not yet comprehend. The scent of wood smoke was gone, replaced entirely by the scent of pine, and him. That scent that spoke of the wild, of the woods that grew ancient around her old home. She had to know the truth. Chapter 3. The Scent of Pine and Fury. The walk was silent, punctuated only by the crunch of their boots on the frost-covered ground and the distant howl of a dog or perhaps, Evana thought with a shiver, something else entirely. Rhys walked with a purposeful stride, his head held high, his senses seemingly alert to every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig. He didn't speak, didn't offer any explanations, and Evana, despite her mounting questions and growing unease, found herself strangely reluctant to break the silence. The scent of pine grew stronger as they moved away from the town and into the surrounding woods. The trees, ancient and towering, loomed over them, their branches intertwined, forming a dense canopy that blotted out most of the moonlight. The air was cold and damp, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, but beneath it all, there was that other scent, the one that clung to Rhys, a wild, musky aroma that both intrigued and unsettled her. Evana wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill, both physical and emotional. She glanced at Rhys, studying his profile in the dappled moonlight that filtered through the trees. He was a mystery, an enigma, a walking contradiction. He exuded an aura of danger, of untamed power, yet there was also a gentleness in the way he held her hand, a protectiveness in the way he guided her through the tangled undergrowth. She stumbled over a root, and Rhys instantly tightened his grip on her hand, steadying her. "Careful," he murmured, his voice low and close to her ear. The brief contact, the warmth of his breath against her skin, sent a shiver through her, a sensation that had nothing to do with the cold. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching slightly. She was acutely aware of his proximity, of the sheer physicality of him, of the way he seemed to fill her senses, overriding the fear that had been her constant companion since he had appeared on her doorstep. They continued walking, deeper and deeper into the woods, until they reached a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a cabin, a rustic structure built of rough-hewn logs, its windows dark and uninviting. Smoke curled from the chimney, a thin, gray plume that dissipated into the night sky. Rhys stopped at the edge of the clearing, his hand still holding hers. "We're here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at the cabin, his expression unreadable. "This is a safe place."
For now.
Evana looked at the cabin, her apprehension growing. It looked desolate, isolated, a place of secrets and shadows. "Whose cabin is this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It's mine," Rhys replied, his voice hesitant, as if he were reluctant to reveal even that small piece of information. Or at least it was. "I haven't been here in a long time." He led her towards the cabin, his grip on her hand tightening slightly as they approached the door. The wood was old and weathered, scarred with the marks of time and the elements. Rhys reached out and pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The cabin was small, sparsely furnished, but surprisingly clean. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, casting a warm, flickering glow over the room. A single, rough-hewn table stood in the center of the room, surrounded by 2 chairs. A narrow bed was tucked into one corner, covered with a thick, woolen blanket. The air was warm and dry, scented with wood smoke and the faint, lingering aroma of pine Rhys's scent. Evana stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. She felt a strange sense of displacement, as if she had stepped into another world, another time. The quiet, predictable life she had known just hours ago seemed a distant memory, replaced by this strange, unsettling reality. Rhys closed the door behind them, the sound echoing in the small space. He turned to face her, his golden eyes searching hers. "I know you have questions," he said, his voice soft, almost apologetic. "And I will answer them. But first you need to rest. You've been through a lot tonight." Evana realized that she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The adrenaline that had fueled her initial fear had faded, leaving her feeling drained and vulnerable. She nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with unshed tears. Rhys gestured towards the bed. "Sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch." She hesitated for a moment, her gaze flickering between him and the bed. Could she trust him? Could she really sleep in this strange place, with this strange man, knowing that she was in danger, that they were coming for her? But there was something in his eyes, a sincerity, a weariness, that reassured her. And she was so tired, so desperately in need of rest, of escape from the fear that had gripped her for so long. Without a word, she walked towards the bed and lay down, pulling the thick blanket around her. The mattress was surprisingly soft, and the warmth of the fire was comforting. She closed her eyes, listening to the crackling of the flames, the gentle rhythm of Rhys's breathing. She drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with images of silver cuffs, golden eyes, and the haunting scent of pine and fury. The fury, she understood now, had been her own. The simmering, buried grief for Thomas. The quiet, persistent rage at a life half-lived. But the pine was all Rhys. And she wasn't sure which scared her more. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Shadowed Grove. Evana woke to the scent of coffee and something savory cooking. The cabin was still dimly lit, the only source of light coming from the embers of the dying fire and a single oil lamp on the table. Rhys was standing by the fireplace, his back to her, tending to a small pot that hung over the flames. He was wearing a dark, long-sleeved shirt and jeans, his dark hair falling over his shoulders in tousled waves. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her, feeling a strange mixture of disorientation and a surprising sense of peace. The fear that had been her constant companion the night before had receded, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Rhys turned, sensing her movement. He gave her a small, almost shy smile, his golden eyes softening in the dim light. "You're awake," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the small cabin. "I hope you slept well." I did," Evana replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Thank you." He gestured towards the table. "I made coffee. And some breakfast." Evana got out of bed, her bare feet sinking into the soft, worn rug that covered the floor. She walked towards the table, feeling a strange sense of intimacy, of sharing this small, enclosed space with this man who was still, in many ways, a complete stranger. He had set the table with 2 mismatched plates and mugs. The breakfast was simple, some kind of stew, thick with vegetables and what smelled like venison, and a crusty loaf of bread. It was far more appealing than the solitary meal she had been preparing for herself the night before. They sat down at the table, facing each other. Evan took a sip of the coffee, the strong, dark brew warming her from the inside out. It was surprisingly good, far better than the instant coffee she usually drank. "This is delicious," she said, looking at Rhys over the rim of her mug. He gave her another small smile, a hint of pride in his eyes. "It's an old recipe," he said. "Something my mother used to make." Evan sensed a story there, a hidden depth of emotion behind his words. She wanted to ask him about his mother, about his past, but she hesitated, unsure if she had the right to pry. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the clinking of their forks against the plates. Evan found herself studying Rhys, noticing the details she had missed the night before. The faint lines around his eyes, the slight furrow in his brow, the way his jaw tightened when he was lost in thought. He looked older than she had initially thought, not in terms of years, but in terms of experience, of burdens carried. Finally, she couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. "Rhys," she said, her voice soft but firm. You said they were coming for me. Who are they?" Rhys put down his fork, his expression turning serious. He looked at her, his golden eyes intense, unwavering. "They are hunters," he said, his voice low and grave. "Hunters of my kind." Evan frowned, her confusion deepening. "Your kind?" she repeated. What kind is that?" He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers, as if he were struggling to find the right words. "We are different," he finally said. "We have abilities, powers, that most humans don't possess. We are werewolves." The word hung in the air between them, heavy, unbelievable. Evan stared at him, her mind reeling. Werewolves? It was absurd, impossible. She had always considered such things to be myths, legends, stories to scare children. She opened her mouth to speak, to protest, to deny the reality of what he was saying, but the words wouldn't come. She looked at him, at his golden eyes, at the intensity of his gaze, at the silver cuffs that still encircled her wrists, and she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he was telling the truth. And the cuffs?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What do they have to do with all of this?" Rhys reached out and gently touched one of the cuffs, his fingertips tracing the intricate patterns. "They are a binding," he said. "A link between your bloodline and mine. They were forged centuries ago as part of a pact, a treaty between our ancestors. A pact that was meant to ensure peace, but also to control us, to keep our powers in check." "Control you?" Evan repeated, her voice rising slightly. "But why?" "Because we are dangerous," Rhys said, his voice laced with a hint of self-loathing. "We have the potential for great power, great destruction. The hunters, they fear us. They want to eradicate us." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "The cuffs, they were meant to suppress our abilities, to keep us docile. But the magic that forged them, it's weakening. And when the wolf moon burns them, like it did last night, it means the binding is breaking. It means you are awakening." Awakening? To what? Evan wondered. To a heritage she had never known? To a power she didn't understand? To a war she didn't want to be a part of? The weight of his words, the weight of her destiny that suddenly changed. Chapter 5. A touch of silver and fear. Awakening. Evan repeated, the word tasting foreign on her tongue. It felt too grand, too mystical for the quiet life she'd always known. Awakening to what, exactly? Rhys leaned back, his gaze never leaving hers. The firelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on his face, making his golden eyes seem to glow with an inner light. To your true nature, he said, his voice low and resonant. To the power that flows through your blood, the power that has been dormant for generations, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. Evan shook her head, a wave of denial washing over her. But I'm just Evan. I'm a librarian, a widow. I'm not powerful. A faint smile touched Rhys's lips, a fleeting expression that softened the hard lines of his face. You are more than you know, Evan. Much more. The blood of the Corbins is strong, ancient. It carries the legacy of a powerful line of shapeshifters. Shapeshifters? Evan whispered, the word conjuring images of fantastical creatures, of things that shouldn't exist. Rhys nodded. The ability to shift between human and wolf form. It's a gift, a curse, a burden depending on how you choose to see it. Evan looked at her hands, at the silver cuffs that encircled her wrists. They seemed to pulse with a faint warmth, a subtle reminder of the burning pain she had experienced the night before. And these cuffs, they were meant to prevent that? To stop me from shifting? Yes, Rhys confirmed. They were forged by the hunters, with the help of some of your ancestors, those who feared the power of their own bloodline. They believed that by suppressing the ability to shift, they could control us, keep us from becoming a threat. But the pact you said it was breaking. Rhys's expression darkened. The magic that binds the cuffs is weakening. The hunters know this. They will be searching for those whose cuffs are reacting, those who are awakening. They will see you as a threat, a rogue element that needs to be eliminated. A cold wave of fear washed over Evan. She had spent her life avoiding conflict, seeking solace in the quiet routine of her days. The thought of being hunted, of being pursued by those who wanted to harm her, was terrifying. But why me? She asked, her voice trembling. Why now? Rhys sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. The wolf moon, he said. It amplifies the magic, accelerates the weakening of the cuffs. And there are other factors, prophecies, signs, things that indicate that this is a time of great change, a time when the old ways are being challenged, when the balance of power is shifting. He leaned forward, his gaze intense, urgent. Evan, you need to understand. You're not safe here. Not anymore. The hunters, they are relentless. They will stop at nothing to find you. Evan felt a surge of panic, a desperate need to escape, to run away from this impossible reality. But where could she go? Who could she trust? She looked at Rhys, at his golden eyes, at the strength and determination etched on his face. He was a stranger, a werewolf, a creature of myth and legend. Yet he was also the only person who seemed to know what was happening to her, the only one who offered any kind of protection. What do I do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rhys reached across the table and gently took her hand. His touch was warm, reassuring, sending a jolt of energy through her, a feeling that was both unsettling and strangely comforting. You need to learn to control your power, he said, his voice firm but gentle. You need to learn to shift, to embrace your true nature. And you need to stay hidden from the hunters. But how? Evan asked, her mind reeling. I don't know anything about any of this. I will teach you, Rhys said, his gaze holding hers. I will protect you. I owe it to your ancestors. And to you. His words, his promise, hung in the air between them. A promise of protection, of guidance, of a future that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Evan looked at their joined hands, at the contrast between his strong, calloused fingers and her own, softer ones. She felt a strange, unfamiliar connection to him, a bond that seemed to transcend the fear and uncertainty that surrounded them. It felt like a lifeline, a thread of hope in the darkness that had suddenly enveloped her life. But as she looked at him, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. Could she really trust him? Could she trust this man, this creature, who had emerged from the shadows and turned her world upside down? He had just finished explaining how her ancestors had helped create the very thing that was her prison. How could she trust the descendant of the people who had tried to stop hers? Chapter 6. The Hunter's Mark Unveiled. The doubt lingered, a knot of unease in Evan's stomach. Rhys's words about her ancestors, their complicity in forging the cuffs, echoed in her mind. It was a betrayal that cut deep, a wound that reopened the old scars of her family history, the whispers of secrets and shadows that she had always tried to ignore. Your ancestors, she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. They helped create these prisons. They sided with the hunters. How can I trust you, a descendant of those who betrayed us? Rhys's hand tightened around hers, his grip firm but not painful. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. "I know," he said, his voice low and heavy. "I know it's a difficult thing to accept. My ancestors, they made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. Driven by fear, by a desire for power, they made a pact with the hunters, a pact that has caused generations of suffering." He paused, his gaze shifting away from hers, as if he were looking back at a past that haunted him. "But not all of us agreed with their actions," he continued. "There were those who resisted, those who fought against the hunters, those who tried to protect the innocent. My mother was one of them." He looked back at her, his eyes filled with a fierce intensity. "I am not my ancestors, Evan. I am not bound by their choices. I have spent my life trying to atone for their sins, trying to protect those who are hunted, trying to break the cycle of violence and fear." Evan searched his face, trying to discern the truth behind his words. She saw the weariness in his eyes, the lines of pain etched around his mouth, the subtle tremor in his hand that held hers. She sensed a deep-seated conflict within him, a struggle between his heritage and his own sense of justice.
"Why?"
she asked, her voice softer now.
"Why are you helping me?"
"What do you gain from this?" Reese's gaze held hers unwavering.
"I told you," he said.
"I owe it to your ancestors, to the ones who were wronged. And I owe it to you. I see something in you, Evan. A strength, a resilience, a spirit that refuses to be broken. You are not just a victim of this ancient pact. You are a key to breaking it."
"A key."
The word resonated with her, a faint echo of the power that Reese said flowed through her blood. But it also filled her with a sense of trepidation, a fear of the responsibility that was being thrust upon her. "But I don't know anything about this," she protested. "I don't know how to shift, to control my power. I'm not a fighter." "You will learn," Reese said, his voice firm, reassuring. "I will teach you. We will do this together." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver object. It was a ring, intricately carved with the same swirling patterns that adorned the cuffs on her wrists. "This," he said, holding it out to her, "belonged to your grandmother. It was passed down to her, along with the cuffs, but it was hidden, kept secret from the hunters." Evan took the ring, her fingers trembling slightly. It felt cool and heavy in her palm, the silver smooth and polished. She recognized the design, the intricate swirls that seemed to shift and writhe in the light. It was a familiar symbol, a connection to her past, to the grandmother she had loved and lost. What does it do?" she asked. "It's a focus," Reese explained. "A conduit for your power. It will help you to control the shift, to channel your energy. It will also protect you."
"To a degree."
He reached out and gently touched one of the cuffs on her wrist. "The hunters, they can track us through these," he said. "They have devices, sensors, that can detect the magic that binds them. But the ring, it can disrupt their signal, make it harder for them to find us." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a sense of urgency. "We need to leave this place," he said.
"Soon."
"The hunters, they could be anywhere. They could be watching us right now." Evan felt a surge of fear, a renewed sense of danger. She looked around the small cabin, at the flickering firelight, at the shadows that danced on the walls. It no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a trap, a place where they were vulnerable and exposed. She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. A faint warmth spread from the ring up her arm, a tingling sensation that mirrored the energy she felt from the cuffs. She looked at Reese, her fear battling with a growing sense of determination. "Where will we go?" she asked. He met his gaze, to offer what comfort he could muster, but he didn't answer. Instead, he reached out to touch a marking on the wood by the window. It had been covered by a piece of tapestry, but now it sat, exposed. It was a sigil. "They've been here," he said. "They already know." Chapter 7. Flight through the moonlit mist. Reese's words hung in the air, heavy with dread. "They've been here." The sigil, a crude carving of a wolf's head crossed with two swords, was a clear message, a hunter's mark. Evan felt a chill run down her spine, the sense of security the cabin had offered dissolving into a chilling vulnerability. "How long ago?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze fixed on the ominous symbol. Rhys examined the mark, his fingers tracing the rough edges of the carving. Recently, he said, his voice grim. Within the last few hours. They're close. He turned to her, his golden eyes filled with a fierce urgency. We need to leave.
Now.
There's no time to pack, no time to gather supplies. We need to disappear, to vanish into the night. Evan nodded, her mind racing. She grabbed her coat from a hook by the door, her movements hurried, frantic. The fear that had been simmering beneath the surface now erupted, a cold wave of panic that threatened to overwhelm her. Rhys extinguished the oil lamp, plunging the cabin into near darkness, the only remaining light coming from the dying embers of the fire. He took her hand, his grip firm, reassuring. Stay close to me, he said, his voice low and urgent. Don't make a sound. He opened the door, peering out into the night. The moon was still high, but a thick mist had rolled in, blanketing the clearing in a swirling, ethereal shroud. The trees loomed like ghostly figures, their branches shrouded in the fog, their forms indistinct and menacing. They stepped out of the cabin, into the cold, damp air. The mist clung to them, chilling their skin, obscuring their vision. Evan could barely see a few feet in front of her, the world reduced to a swirling, gray void. Rhys led her away from the cabin, moving with a silent, purposeful stride. He seemed to navigate the mist with an uncanny ease, as if he could see through the fog, as if he knew the terrain intimately. Evan clung to his hand, her senses on high alert, listening for any sound, any sign of pursuit. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the soft rustle of their footsteps on the damp ground and the distant, mournful howl of a wolf or perhaps, Evan thought with a shiver, something else. They walked for what seemed like hours, the mist swirling around them, their path uncertain. Evan felt a growing sense of disorientation, of being lost in a dreamlike world, where the familiar landmarks of her life had vanished, replaced by an eerie, unsettling landscape. She stumbled, her foot catching on a hidden root. Rhys instantly tightened his grip on her hand, steadying her. Are you all right? He whispered, his voice close to her ear. Yes, she whispered back, her voice trembling slightly. Just disoriented. He squeezed her hand, a silent reassurance. We're almost there, he said. Just a little further. She didn't ask where there was. She simply trusted him, followed him blindly through the mist, her fear battling with a growing sense of exhilaration. There was something strangely liberating about this flight, about shedding the constraints of her old life and venturing into the unknown. As they walked, Evan became aware of a subtle change in the air. The scent of pine, which had been her constant companion, grew stronger, more intense. She could also smell the damp earth, the decaying leaves, and something else, something wilder, something that resonated with the silver cuffs on her wrists, with the ring on her finger. She felt a strange pull, a tingling sensation in her limbs, a warmth that spread through her body. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, a sense of awakening, of power stirring within her. Suddenly, Rhys stopped. He turned to her, his golden eyes glowing in the dim light that filtered through the mist. Listen, he whispered. Evan strained her ears, trying to hear what he heard. At first, there was only silence, the oppressive silence of the mist-shrouded woods. But then she heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound, like the beating of a drum, coming from somewhere in the distance. What is that? She whispered. Rhys's expression was grim. The hunters, he said. They're using drums to coordinate their search. To drive us out. The sound grew louder, closer, a relentless rhythm that pulsed through the air, through the ground, through Evanth's very bones. Fear surged through her, a primal terror that made her want to run, to hide, to disappear. But Rhys didn't run. He stood his ground, his body tense, his senses alert. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a fierce determination. They're close, he said. But we're closer.
He turned and started to jog.
Stay with me. He wasn't talking about staying close any longer. He wanted her to run. The shift in pace felt symbolic and added speed to the already present danger. Chapter 8. Sanctuary in the Forgotten Hollow. The run was a blur, a desperate scramble through the clinging mist and tangled undergrowth. Evan struggled to keep pace with Reese, her lungs burning, her legs aching, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The drums grew louder, closer, a relentless, driving rhythm that fueled her fear and pushed her to her limits. She could hear the hunters now, their shouts and calls echoing through the woods, their presence a tangible threat that pressed in on them from all sides. She stumbled several times, her feet catching on hidden roots and rocks, but Reese never faltered, his hand gripping hers, pulling her along, urging her forward. The scent of pine grew even stronger, almost overpowering, mingling with the scent of wet earth and the metallic tang of fear. Evan felt a strange energy coursing through her veins, a tingling sensation that seemed to emanate from the silver cuffs and the ring on her finger. It was a feeling of both terror and exhilaration, a sense of being on the edge of something profound, something transformative. Suddenly, Reese veered off the faint path they had been following, plunging into a dense thicket of bushes and trees. Evan followed him blindly, trusting his instincts, her body moving on autopilot, driven by a primal need to survive. They emerged into a small, hidden hollow, a secret place sheltered by towering cliffs and a canopy of ancient trees. The mist was thinner here, the air clearer, the silence more profound. In the center of the hollow stood a small, crumbling stone structure, its walls covered in moss and ivy, its roof partially collapsed. It looked like an ancient ruin, a forgotten relic of a bygone era. Reese stopped, releasing her hand. He leaned against one of the stone walls, his chest heaving, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Evan collapsed beside him, her body trembling with exhaustion, her mind reeling from the intensity of their flight. What is this place?" she asked, her voice breathless, her gaze sweeping over the ruined structure. Reese took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. "It's an old sanctuary," he said, his voice still strained. "A place of refuge for my kind. A place where the hunters rarely venture." Evan looked around the hollow, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The air felt different here, charged with a strange energy, a sense of ancient power. She could feel the presence of the past, the echoes of those who had sought refuge here before them. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice filled with a sense of awe. Reese nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "It is," he agreed, "a place forgotten by time, hidden from the world, a place where we can rest, for a while." The drumming had faded, replaced by the distant calls of the hunters, their voices growing fainter as they moved further away. Evan felt a wave of relief wash over her, a momentary reprieve from the terror of their pursuit. They sat in silence for a few minutes, catching their breath, listening to the sounds of the forest. The wind rustled through the leaves, a gentle whisper that seemed to soothe her frayed nerves. The air was filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the lingering aroma of Reese, a scent that had become strangely familiar, a source of comfort in this unfamiliar world. Evan looked at the ruined structure, her curiosity piqued. "What was this place?" she asked. "Who built it?" Reese followed her gaze, his expression thoughtful. "It was built long ago," he said, "by the first shapeshifters, the ancestors of both our bloodlines. It was a place of learning, of ceremony, of transformation." He paused, his gaze shifting to the silver cuffs on her wrists. It was here that they learned to control their power, to master the shift, to harness the energy of the moon and the earth. Evan felt a shiver run down her spine. She looked at her hands, at the cuffs, at the ring. She could feel the power stirring within her, a latent force that was waiting to be unleashed. "Well, will you teach me here?" she asked, her voice hesitant, filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Reese met her gaze, his golden eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "Yes," he said. "This is where your journey begins, Evan. This is where you will awaken to your true nature." He stood up, extending a hand to her. "Come," he said. "There's much to learn, and little time." Evan took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. She felt a surge of energy pass between them, a connection that was both physical and something more. She stood up, her legs still shaky, but her spirit strengthened by a newfound resolve. As she followed him towards the ruined structure, towards the heart of the forgotten hollow, she knew that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just Evan the Corbin, the quiet librarian, the grieving widow. She was something more, something wilder, something powerful. She was a shapeshifter, an heir to an ancient legacy, a key to breaking the chains that had bound her for so long. The sounds of the hunt were still there, at the edge of her awareness. But now she had somewhere to run, too. Chapter 9. The Weight of Unspoken Truths. The interior of the ruined structure was surprisingly dry and sheltered, despite the collapsed roof and crumbling walls. The air was still and quiet, heavy with the scent of dust and old stone, and a faint, lingering aroma of something else, something that Evan couldn't quite identify, but that resonated with the silver cuffs on her wrists and the ring on her finger. Reese had gathered some fallen branches and twigs and started a small fire in a makeshift hearth in the center of the room. The flames flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating the intricate carvings that adorned the stones, depictions of wolves and humans, intertwined in a complex dance of power and transformation. Evan sat on a fallen stone slab, watching him, her mind still reeling from the events of the past few hours. The fear of the hunt had subsided, replaced by a cautious curiosity, a growing awareness of the profound changes that were taking place within her. "These carvings," she said, gesturing towards the walls. "They tell a story, don't they?" Reese nodded, his gaze fixed on the flames. "They do," he said. "They tell the story of our ancestors, of their connection to the moon, to the earth, to the power that flows through all living things." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "They also tell the story of the pact," he continued, "of the betrayal, the division, the centuries of conflict that have separated our bloodlines." Evan looked at the carvings, trying to decipher their meaning. She saw images of wolves howling at the moon, of humans transforming into wolves, of battles fought between humans and werewolves, of ancient rituals and ceremonies. It was a history she had never known, a legacy that had been hidden from her, suppressed by the silver cuffs and the fear of the hunters. "Tell me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Tell me everything. I need to understand." Reese looked at her, his golden eyes searching hers. He seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if he were weighing his words, as if he were reluctant to reveal the full extent of the truth. "It's a long story," he said, his voice low and heavy. "A complicated one. And it's not a pretty one." "I don't care," Evan said, her voice unwavering. "I need to know. I need to understand my past, my heritage, my destiny." Reese sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. He sat down on a stone slab opposite her, the firelight flickering between them, casting their faces in a chiaroscuro of light and shadow. "Very well," he said. "But be warned, Evan, some truths are difficult to bear." He began to speak, his voice low and resonant, weaving a tale of ancient magic, of shape-shifting powers, of a time when humans and werewolves lived in harmony, connected by a shared reverence for the natural world. He spoke of the rise of the hunters, of their fear of the werewolves' power, of their desire to control and eradicate them. He spoke of the pact, of the betrayal of some of the Corbin ancestors, of their collaboration with the hunters in forging the silver cuffs, in suppressing the ability to shift. He spoke of the suffering, the persecution, the centuries of hiding and fear that the werewolves had endured. He spoke of the resistance, of those who had fought back, of those who had tried to preserve the ancient ways, of those who had sought to break the chains of the pact. As he spoke, Evan felt a growing sense of anger, of outrage, at the injustice that had been done to his people, to her people. She felt a deep sorrow for the suffering they had endured, for the loss of their freedom, for the suppression of their true nature. But she also felt a growing sense of connection, of belonging. She began to understand the strange pull she had felt towards Reese, the sense of familiarity, of recognition, that had drawn her to him from the moment she had first seen him. It was more than just physical attraction, more than just a shared danger. It was a connection that ran deeper, a bond that was rooted in their shared heritage, in the ancient pact that had linked their bloodlines for centuries. She also started sensing why he kept pausing, kept looking away, and running his hands through his hair. He wasn't just telling her about the past. He was remembering it, living it. "Reese," she said, her voice filled with a sudden, urgent need to understand. "What aren't you telling me? There's some weight on your heart." He met her eyes. He looked torn, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of something in her heart that was more than curious. It was empathy. He nodded slightly, and she knew. This story was more than just a story. It was his truth, too. Chapter 10. Scars of the Past, Bonds of the Present. Reese's gaze held a Vance, the firelight reflecting in the depths of his golden eyes, revealing a vulnerability that he usually kept carefully hidden. He took a deep breath, the air hissing slightly between his teeth, as if he were bracing himself for a painful confession. "You're right," he said, his voice low and rough. "There's more to the story. More than just the history of our ancestors, more than just the pact and the hunters." He paused, his gaze shifting away from hers, focusing on the flickering flames. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths, with the weight of a past that continued to haunt him. "My mother," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. She was killed by the hunters. When I was a child." Evan felt a sharp pang of sympathy, a deep ache in her heart for the young boy who had lost his mother to such violence, such hatred. She understood now the weariness she had seen in his eyes, the lines of pain etched around his mouth, the subtle tremor in his hands. It was the mark of a trauma that had never fully healed, a wound that continued to bleed beneath the surface. "I'm so sorry, Reese," she said, her voice filled with genuine compassion. He looked back at her, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "She fought them," he said, his voice regaining some of its strength. "She resisted. She refused to let them take her, to let them break her spirit. She died protecting me." He paused again, his jaw tightening, his fists clenching. "I saw it happen," he continued, his voice raw with emotion. "I saw them kill her. I was helpless. I couldn't do anything to stop them." Evana reached across the space between them and gently placed her hand on his arm. His skin was warm beneath her fingertips, the muscles tense and coiled. She felt a surge of empathy, a desire to comfort him, to ease the pain that he had carried for so long. "It wasn't your fault, Reese," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You were just a child. You couldn't have stopped them." He shook his head, his eyes filled with a mixture of grief and self-recrimination. "I should have been stronger," he said. "I should have been able to protect her. I failed her." "No," Evana said, her voice unwavering. "You didn't fail her. You survived. You carried on her fight. You're protecting me now. You're honoring her memory." He looked at her, his golden eyes searching hers, as if he were looking for something, some sign of understanding, of acceptance. He found it in her gaze, in the sincerity of her words, in the warmth of her touch. A faint smile touched his lips, a fleeting expression that softened the hard lines of his face. "Thank you, Evana," he said, his voice filled with a quiet gratitude. For listening, for understanding." The silence returned, but it was no longer heavy with unspoken truths. It was a silence of shared sorrow, of shared understanding, of a growing bond between them. A bond that was forged not just by their shared heritage, but by their shared humanity, by their shared capacity for empathy and compassion. Evana felt a shift within herself, a deepening of her feelings for Reese. It was no longer just curiosity or gratitude or a sense of shared destiny. It was something more, something that resonated with the warmth in her heart, with the tingling sensation in her limbs, with the power that was awakening within her. She looked at him, at his strong, handsome face, at the vulnerability hidden beneath his tough exterior, at the golden eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. And she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that she was falling in love with him. But even as she acknowledged this truth, a shadow of doubt crossed her mind. He was a werewolf, a creature of a different world, a world of magic and danger. She was a human, or at least she had been until recently. Their paths were intertwined, their destinies linked, but could they ever truly be together? Could their love overcome the barriers that separated them, the ancient hatreds, the ever-present threat of the hunters? Could she, having just lost her husband not long ago, truly accept another love so soon? She felt his hand move to hold hers from where she had been comforting his arm.
"I'll ask again," she said softly.
"Why are you really helping me?" Chapter 11. A dance of trust and trepidation. Rhys's hand tightened around hers, his calloused fingers intertwining with her softer ones. He looked at her, his golden eyes intense, searching, as if he were trying to convey a truth that went beyond words, a truth that resided in the depths of his soul. "Why am I helping you?" he repeated, his voice low and resonant, a hint of vulnerability coloring his tone. "It's complicated." He paused, his gaze shifting away from hers, focusing on their joined hands. He seemed to be struggling to find the right words, to articulate a feeling that was both profound and deeply personal. "It's more than just duty," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "More than just atoning for the sins of my ancestors, more than just fulfilling a promise." He looked back at her, his golden eyes locking with hers, holding her captive in their intense gaze. "When I saw you," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "standing there on your porch, bathed in the moonlight, with those ancient cuffs on your wrists, I felt something. Something I haven't felt in a very long time." He paused again, his breath catching slightly. "It was recognition, not just of the cuffs, of the pact, of the danger you were in, but something deeper, something that resonated with my very core." Evelyn felt her heart beating faster, a fluttering sensation in her chest. She could sense the truth in his words, the raw emotion that vibrated in his voice. She felt a similar resonance within herself, a connection to him that transcended their different worlds, their different natures. What did you feel?" she asked, her voice barely audible, her breath caught in her throat. Rhys's gaze softened, a flicker of tenderness in his eyes. "I felt hope," he said, his voice filled with a quiet wonder. "Hope for a future that I had long given up on. Hope for a connection that I thought was lost forever. Hope for love." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, charged with emotion. Evelyn felt a surge of warmth flood through her, a tingling sensation that spread from her heart to her fingertips. She had admitted to herself that she was falling in love with him, but to hear him speak of hope, of love, was something else entirely. But even as she felt this surge of emotion, a wave of doubt washed over her. She was still reeling from the loss of her husband, still grappling with the sudden upheaval of her life, still struggling to accept her newfound identity as a shapeshifter. Could she really open her heart to another love, so soon, so unexpectedly? "Rhys," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know. This is all so new. So overwhelming. I'm still trying to understand who I am, what I am. And I'm still grieving." Rhys nodded, his expression understanding, compassionate. "I know," he said, his voice gentle. "I understand. I'm not asking you for anything, Evelyn. I'm not expecting you to reciprocate my feelings. I needed you to know. To understand why I'm so determined to protect you, to help you, to be with you." He squeezed her hand, his touch reassuring, comforting. "I know it's a lot to process," he continued. "And I know we have a long way to go, a difficult path ahead of us. But I believe in us, Evelyn. I believe in the connection we share. I believe that we can overcome the obstacles, the dangers, the differences that separate us." Evelyn looked at him, at his strong, handsome face, at the vulnerability hidden beneath his tough exterior, at the golden eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. And she felt a flicker of hope, a spark of belief, ignite within her own heart. I want to believe it too, Rhys," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I want to trust you. I want to explore this connection we have. But I need time. I needed to learn to control my power, to understand my new identity, to heal. Rhys smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes and lit up his face. Of course, he said. Take all the time you need, Evan. I'll be here. I'll wait. I'll support you, every step of the way. He leaned closer, his gaze intense, his voice dropping to a low, intimate whisper. But know this, Evan Corbin, he said. I am falling in love with you, and I will not give up on us. Not ever. He raised her hand to his lips and gently kissed her knuckles. The touch sent a shiver through her, a jolt of electricity that ignited a fire within her. It was a gesture of respect, of tenderness, of a promise that transcended words. Evan felt her heart swell with emotion, a mixture of fear, excitement, and a growing, undeniable affection for this man, this werewolf, who had entered her life so unexpectedly and turned it upside down. It was a dance, and the music was building, but she was still learning the steps. She needed to become the wolf before she could be his lover. Chapter 12. The howl of the approaching storm. The quiet intimacy of the moment was shattered by a distant, chilling sound, a howl, long and mournful, echoing through the stillness of the forgotten hollow. It was not the howl of an ordinary wolf, but something deeper, more resonant, carrying a primal power that sent shivers down Avant's spine. Rhys's head snapped up, his body instantly tense, his senses on high alert. He released Avant's hand, his golden eyes scanning the surrounding woods, his expression grim. What is it? Evan asked, her voice filled with a renewed sense of fear. It's a signal, Rhys said, his voice low and urgent. A call to arms. The hunters, they're regrouping. They know we're somewhere in this area. The howl came again, closer this time, followed by another and another, creating a chorus of chilling sounds that seemed to press in on them from all sides. Evan felt a surge of panic, a desperate need to flee, to hide, to escape the approaching danger. We need to go, she said, her voice trembling. We need to get out of here. Rhys shook his head, his expression resolute.
No, he said.
Not yet. We're safer here than we would be out in the open. The hunters, they're still searching blindly. They don't know exactly where we are. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a fierce determination. This is where you begin your training, Evan, he said. This is where you learn to control your power, to embrace your true nature. We can't run forever.
We need to be ready to fight.
Evan felt a mixture of fear and reluctance. She had never considered herself a fighter. She had always sought peace, tranquility, the quiet comfort of her books and her routines. The thought of confronting the hunters, of facing the violence and danger that awaited them, was terrifying. But I don't know how, she said, her voice hesitant. I don't know how to shift, to control my power. I'm not ready. Rhys reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. His touch was warm, reassuring, sending a jolt of energy through her. You are stronger than you think, Evan, he said, his voice soft but firm. You have the blood of the Corbins flowing through your veins, the power of your ancestors waiting to be unleashed. I will guide you. I will teach you. You will learn. He took her hand, his grip firm, confident. The first step, he said, is to connect with your inner wolf, to feel the power that resides within you, to embrace the instincts that have been suppressed for so long. He led her towards the center of the ruined structure, towards the makeshift hearth where the fire had died down to glowing embers. He instructed her to sit on the ground, to close her eyes, to focus on her breathing. Clear your mind, he said, his voice a low, calming murmur. Let go of your fear, your doubts, your anxieties. Focus on the silence, on the stillness within you. Feel the earth beneath you, the air around you, the energy that flows through all living things. Evan followed his instructions, closing her eyes, taking deep, slow breaths. She tried to clear her mind, to quiet the inner turmoil that threatened to overwhelm her. It was difficult at first, her thoughts racing, her fear a constant presence. But gradually, as she focused on her breathing, on the rhythm of her heart, on the warmth of the embers, she began to feel a sense of calm, a stillness that settled over her. She could feel the earth beneath her, solid and grounding, the cool air on her skin, the faint scent of pine and old stone. Now, Reese said, his voice close to her ear, imagine your inner wolf. Visualize its form, its strength, its power. Feel its presence within you, waiting to be awakened. Evan tried to imagine it, to conjure the image of a wolf in her mind. At first, it was just a vague outline, a shadowy form that flickered and faded. But as she focused, as she delved deeper into her consciousness, the image became clearer, more defined. She saw a wolf, a magnificent creature with thick, silver-gray fur, piercing golden eyes, and a powerful, muscular body. It was a creature of wild beauty, of untamed strength, of primal instinct.
And it was her.
She felt a strange sensation, a tingling in her limbs, a warmth that spread through her body. It was a feeling of connection, of recognition, of something ancient and powerful stirring within her. The distant howls of the hunters seemed to fade, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat, the rhythm of her breath, the growing presence of her inner wolf. The storm was approaching, that was undeniable, but within Evan a different kind of storm was brewing. Chapter 13. Revelations under the waning crescent. The tingling intensified, spreading through Avant's body like wildfire. She felt a strange pressure building within her, a sense of expansion, of transformation. Her bones ached, her muscles twitched, her skin felt stretched and tight. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, a feeling of losing control, of surrendering to something wild and unknown. Breathe, Reese whispered, his voice a calming presence amidst the growing storm within her. Let it happen. Don't fight it. Embrace the change. Evan focused on his words, on his voice, using it as an anchor to hold onto her sanity, to keep her from being swept away by the overwhelming sensations. She took deep, slow breaths, trying to relax her muscles, to surrender to the transformation that was taking place. She felt her senses sharpen, her hearing becoming more acute, her sense of smell heightened. She could hear the rustle of leaves in the wind, the faint scuttling of small animals in the undergrowth, the distant, chilling howls of the hunters. She could smell the damp earth, the old stone, the scent of Reese, now amplified, more intense, a mixture of pine and musk and something wilder, something that resonated with her inner wolf. Her vision blurred, the edges of the ruined structure seeming to shimmer and distort. She felt a strange shifting, a realignment of her bones, her muscles, her very being. It was as if her body was being reshaped, remolded, transformed into something new, something powerful. Then, with a sudden, sharp jolt, it happened. She felt a surge of energy, a wave of power that coursed through her veins, exploding in her consciousness. She gasped, her eyes snapping open. She was no longer sitting on the ground. She was standing on 4 paws, her body covered in thick, silver-gray fur, her senses overwhelmed by a flood of new and unfamiliar sensations. She looked down at her paws, at the sharp claws that extended from her toes, at the powerful muscles that rippled beneath her fur. She was a wolf. A wave of panic washed over her. She tried to speak, to cry out, but only a whimper escaped her throat. She felt disoriented, confused, trapped in this new, unfamiliar form. Easy, Evan, Reese said, his voice calm and reassuring. He was kneeling before her, his golden eyes, now even more striking against the backdrop of her heightened senses, meeting hers. You're all right. You've done it. You've shifted. He reached out a hand, slowly, cautiously, as if approaching a wild animal. Evan instinctively recoiled, a low growl rumbling in her chest. She felt a surge of fear, of mistrust, a primal instinct to protect herself from this human. It's me, Evan, Reese said, his voice soft, gentle. It's Reese. You know me. You trust me. His words, his voice, penetrated the fog of her fear, her confusion. She recognized him, not just his scent, not just his voice, but something deeper, a connection that transcended their different forms. She lowered her head, nuzzling his hand with her snout. She felt the warmth of his skin against her fur, the familiar scent of him, a mixture of pine and musk and something uniquely Reese. It was a comforting, reassuring presence in this strange, new reality. He stroked her fur, his touch gentle, soothing.
"That's it," he said.
"You're doing great. You're in control. You're a beautiful wolf, Eventha." His words, his praise, calmed her, helped her to regain a sense of herself, of her identity. She was still a wolf, a creature of wild beauty and power, but she was also Eventha, the woman who had lived a quiet life, the woman who was falling in love with this man, this werewolf. She looked around the ruined structure, seeing it with new eyes, with a heightened awareness of its ancient history, its hidden power. She felt a connection to this place, to the ancestors who had walked here before her, to the magic that flowed through the very stones. She looked back at Reese. She wanted to speak to thank him. She opened her jaws, and this time, instead of a whimper, a howl emerged. It was her voice, and it echoed off the ruins, challenging the hunter's calls in the distance. She had power now, and with that came understanding. Chapter 14. The Price of a Forbidden Promise. The howl subsided, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Eventha felt a surge of exhilaration, a sense of power and freedom she had never experienced before. She was a wolf, a creature of the wild, connected to the ancient magic that flowed through the earth and the moon. But she was also Eventha, a woman with a human heart, a human mind, a human love for the man who stood before her. Reese smiled, his golden eyes filled with pride and admiration. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with a quiet wonder. "You truly did it." He reached out and stroked her fur, his touch gentle and reassuring. Eventha leaned into his touch, enjoying the familiar sensation, the comfort of his presence. She felt a deep connection to him, a bond that transcended their different forms, a love that was both terrifying and exhilarating. But even as she reveled in this newfound power, in this connection with Reese, a shadow of doubt crossed her mind. The hunters were still out there, their threat a constant presence. And she was now a target, a creature of the wild, a shapeshifter who represented everything they feared and hated. She looked at Reese, her wolf eyes conveying a question, a plea for guidance. She needed to learn to control this power, to master the shift, to be able to defend herself, to protect him. Reese understood her unspoken question. "The shift," he said, "is only the beginning, Eventha. You need to learn to control it, to move between your human and wolf forms at will. It takes practice, discipline, and trust." He knelt before her, his golden eyes level with hers. "The key," he said, "is to find the balance. To embrace both your human and wolf natures, to integrate them into a single, unified being. It's not about suppressing one or the other, but about finding harmony between them." He explained the process, the mental and physical techniques involved in shifting back to her human form. He spoke of visualization, of focusing on her human body, of drawing the wolf energy back into herself, of controlling the flow of magic that governed the transformation. Eventha listened intently, her wolf mind absorbing his words, her human mind struggling to grasp the concepts. It sounded daunting, complex, a challenge that she wasn't sure she was ready to face. "Try it," Reese urged, his voice gentle but firm. "Focus on your human form. Visualize yourself as you were before the shift. Feel the energy receding, the transformation reversing." Eventha closed her eyes, trying to follow his instructions. She imagined herself as she had been, sitting on the ground, her human body clothed in familiar garments. She tried to feel the wolf energy receding, the bones shifting back, the fur dissolving, the claws retracting. It was difficult, frustrating. She felt a resistance, a reluctance within her wolf nature to relinquish its newfound freedom, its power. The shift was not as smooth, not as seamless as the first time. She felt a tearing sensation, a painful stretching of her muscles, her bones, her very being. But gradually, slowly, she began to feel the change. Her snout shortened, her fur receded, her paws transformed back into hands and feet. She felt the familiar sensation of her human skin, the weight of her human body, the limitations of her human senses. Finally, with a gasp, she was back. She was Evan again, sitting on the ground, naked and vulnerable, her body trembling from the exertion. Rhys was there, holding her coat, wrapping it around her shoulders, offering her warmth and comfort. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with relief and pride. "You shifted back." Evan leaned against him, exhausted but exhilarated. She had done it. She had mastered the shift, at least in its most basic form. She had taken the first step towards controlling her power, towards embracing her true nature. But even as she celebrated this victory, a chilling thought crossed her mind. The hunters were still out there, and they were getting closer. And she had made a promise, a forbidden promise, to a man who was both her protector and her lover. A promise to learn, to fight, to protect. A promise, she realized, with a growing sense of unease. She knew now that this wasn't just about her. She had a connection with Rhys, and the ancient magic of this place had shown it to her. She was his mate, she finally accepted. And that meant their enemies were shared. "Rhys," she started, worried for him. "What about the others? Your kind? What will they think of me?" Rhys knew the answer, and he knew the cost of his choice to bring her here. He had defied his own kind to save her. And now, they both had to deal with the fallout. The hunters weren't the only threat anymore. Chapter 15. Blood and Betrayal in the Cathedral Ruins. Rhys's expression darkened, a shadow of worry crossing his features. He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from Avance, as if he were reluctant to reveal the full extent of the challenges they faced. "The others," he said, his voice low and heavy. "My pack, they will not understand. They will see you as a threat, an outsider, a human who has trespassed on sacred ground." He paused, his jaw tightening, his fists clenching. "I have defied them," he continued, his voice raw with emotion. "I have broken our laws, our traditions, by bringing you here, by revealing our secrets to you. I have risked everything." Evan felt a pang of guilt, a deep sense of responsibility for the trouble she had caused him. She had known that their relationship was forbidden, that their different worlds were separated by ancient hatreds and fears. But she had not fully grasped the consequences of their actions, the price that Rhys had paid for protecting her, for loving her. "I'm so sorry, Rhys," she said, her voice filled with remorse. "I didn't realize I didn't mean to cause you so much trouble." He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. His touch was warm, reassuring, a silent expression of his unwavering devotion. "It's not your fault, Evan," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I made my choice. I chose to protect you, to be with you, regardless of the consequences. I do not regret it." But even as he spoke these words, Evan sensed a deep-seated fear within him, a fear not just for himself, but for her. He knew that his pack would not be as forgiving as he was, that they would see her as a threat that needed to be eliminated. "What will we do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "How will we face them?" Rhys took a deep breath, his expression resolute. "We will face them together," he said. "We will show them that you are not a threat, that you are one of us, that you are my mate." He paused, his golden eyes searching hers. "But it will not be easy, Evan," he continued. "There will be resistance, opposition, perhaps even violence. We need to be prepared." He stood up, extending a hand to her. "Come," he said. "There's another place we need to go. A place where we can gather our strength, where we can prepare for what is to come." Evan took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. She felt a surge of determination, a resolve to fight alongside him, to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She was no longer just a frightened human, a grieving widow, a woman lost in a world she didn't understand. She was a shapeshifter, a wolf, a warrior, and she would not back down. He led her out of the forgotten hollow, back into the mist-shrouded woods. The howls of the hunters had faded, replaced by an ominous silence, a sense of anticipation, of a storm brewing on the horizon. They walked for what seemed like hours, the terrain becoming rougher, more treacherous. They climbed over fallen logs, waded through streams, navigated through dense thickets of bushes and trees. Evan felt her wolf senses sharpening, her body becoming more attuned to the rhythms of the forest, her movements more fluid, more graceful. Finally, they reached their destination. It was a clearing, dominated by the towering ruins of an ancient cathedral. The walls were crumbling, the roof had long since collapsed, the stained glass windows were shattered, but the structure still retained a sense of grandeur, of majesty, of a power that transcended time and decay. "What is this place?" Evan asked, her voice filled with awe. "It's a place of power," Rhys said. "A place where the veil between worlds is thin, where the magic is strong. It was once a place of worship, of ceremony, for both humans and werewolves. But it was desecrated by the hunters." He led her towards the ruins, towards the gaping entrance of the cathedral. As they stepped inside, Evan felt a chill run down her spine. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and old stone, and a faint, lingering aroma of blood. She looked around, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The interior was vast, cavernous, the walls lined with crumbling pillars, the floor covered in rubble and debris. The remnants of the stained glass windows cast colorful patterns on the floor, illuminating the space with an eerie, ethereal glow. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the ruins. Well, look who finally decided to show up." Evan whirled around, her heart pounding in her chest. Standing in the shadows, near one of the crumbling pillars, were 3 figures. They were tall, powerfully built, their faces hidden by the shadows, but their eyes glowed with a menacing, golden light. "Werewolves." Rhys stepped forward, his body tense, his senses on high alert. "Cale," he said, his voice cold and hard. "What are you doing here?" The figure in the center, presumably Cale, stepped forward, his features now visible in the dim light. He was a handsome man, with sharp features, dark hair, and a cruel smile that revealed his sharp, pointed teeth. "We've been waiting for you, Rhys," Cale said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "We heard about your little pet, your human mate." He looked at Evan, his golden eyes filled with disdain and hatred. "You have brought shame upon us, Rhys," he continued. "You have broken our laws, betrayed our trust, and you will pay the price." Before Rhys could respond, Cale lunged at him with supernatural speed. This was not going to be a discussion. This was a fight, and it started with betrayal among his own kind. Chapter 16. Echoes of a lost love, a found destiny. The attack was swift, brutal, a blur of motion that Evan could barely follow. Cale's claws raked across Rhys's chest, drawing blood, tearing through his shirt. Rhys staggered back, his eyes widening in surprise and pain, but he quickly regained his footing, shifting into his wolf form, a magnificent creature of dark fur and golden eyes. The other 2 werewolves followed suit, transforming into their wolf forms, their bodies rippling and expanding, their teeth and claws extending, their eyes glowing with a predatory hunger. Evan felt a surge of fear, a desperate need to flee, to escape this sudden eruption of violence. But she knew she couldn't leave Rhys, couldn't abandon him to face these attackers alone. She was a wolf now, too, a shapeshifter, and she had a responsibility to fight, to protect the man she loved. She took a deep breath, focusing on her inner wolf, on the power that flowed through her veins. She felt the familiar tingling sensation, the pressure building within her, the transformation beginning. She shifted, her body changing, her bones realigning, her fur sprouting, her senses sharpening. She was a wolf again, a creature of silver-gray fur and golden eyes, her body smaller than Rhys's, but still powerful, agile, ready to fight. She growled, a low, menacing sound that echoed through the cathedral ruins, a challenge to the attackers, a declaration of her presence, her loyalty, her love. The 3 wolves turned their attention to her, their eyes narrowing, their lips curling back in a snarl. Cale, still in his wolf form, let out a chilling howl, a signal to attack. The battle was joined. It was a chaotic melee, a whirlwind of fur and claws and teeth, a dance of death and survival. Evan fought with a ferocity she had never known she possessed, driven by instinct, by adrenaline, by her love for Rhys. She dodged, she weaved, she snapped, she clawed, using her smaller size and agility to her advantage. She saw Rhys fighting Cale, the two wolves locked in a brutal struggle, their bodies intertwined, their teeth and claws tearing at each other. She saw the other two wolves circling her, trying to find an opening, a weakness to exploit. She fought them off, defending herself with a combination of instinct and the rudimentary training Rhys had given her. She felt pain, sharp and searing, as claws raked across her fur, as teeth sank into her flesh. But she refused to yield, refused to give up, fueled by a primal determination to survive, to protect Rhys. She saw an opening, a moment when one of the wolves was off balance. She lunged, sinking her teeth into his flank, drawing a yelp of pain. The wolf retaliated, slashing at her with his claws, but she held on, her jaws clamped tight, her muscles straining. She felt a surge of power, a rush of adrenaline, as she tasted the blood of her enemy. It was a savage, primal sensation, a feeling of both revulsion and exhilaration. She was a wolf, a predator, and she was fighting for her life, for her love, for her destiny. She saw Rhys break free from Cale's grasp, his fur matted with blood, his body bearing the marks of the brutal fight. He turned his attention to the other wolves, joining Evan in the battle. Together, they fought, a pair of wolves, united by love, by loyalty, by a shared destiny. They fought with a ferocity, a determination, that surprised even themselves. They were not just fighting for survival, but for something more, for a future they both desperately wanted, a future that was now threatened by the ancient hatreds and fears that separated their worlds. A future together. But as Rhys fought off Cale and the other wolf, Evan saw Cale break free, for just a moment. He didn't go back to Rhys. His eyes had found her, and he looked hungry. Chapter 17. The Heart's Reckoning, the Soul's Awakening. Cale's gaze locked onto Evan, his golden eyes burning with a predatory intensity. He saw her as the weaker link, the vulnerable point in their defense, the human who had dared to trespass on their territory, to claim one of their own. He lunged at her, his movements swift and deadly, his claws extended, his teeth bared in a snarl. Evan reacted instinctively, dodging his initial attack, her smaller size and agility allowing her to evade his grasp. But he was relentless, pressing his advantage, forcing her to retreat, to defend herself against his superior strength and experience. She felt claws rake across her flank, drawing a sharp cry of pain. She stumbled, losing her balance, falling to the ground. Cale loomed over her, his shadow casting a dark pall over her, his hot breath washing over her fur. He was about to deliver the killing blow, to end her life, to sever the bond that connected her to Rhys. But then, a roar erupted from behind Cale, a sound of pure rage and fury. Rhys, having dispatched the other two wolves, had seen the danger Evan was in, and he was coming to her rescue. He launched himself at Cale, his body a blur of dark fur and muscle, his teeth bared in a savage snarl. He collided with Cale with the force of a battering ram, knocking him off Evan, sending him sprawling across the cathedral floor. The two wolves engaged in a brutal, savage fight, their bodies intertwined, their teeth and claws tearing at each other. It was a battle of dominance, of survival, of love and loyalty. Evan struggled to her feet, her body aching, her fur matted with blood. She watched the fight, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind filled with a mixture of fear and hope. She wanted to help Rhys, to join the battle, but she knew she was no match for Cale in her current state. She saw Rhys gain the upper hand, his powerful jaws clamping down on Cale's throat, his teeth sinking deep into his flesh. Cale struggled, thrashing and clawing, but Rhys held on, his grip unrelenting, his strength fueled by his love for Evan, by his determination to protect her. Finally, with a sickening crunch, Cale's struggles ceased. He lay still, his body limp, his golden eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Rhys released his grip, stepping back from Cale's lifeless body. He was panting, his chest heaving, his fur matted with blood and sweat. He looked at Eventha, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of relief and something else. Something deeper, something that spoke of a profound connection, a bond that had been tested and strengthened by the crucible of battle. Eventha ran to him, nuzzling his neck, licking his wounds, her wolf body expressing a love and gratitude that transcended words. She felt a surge of relief, of joy, that he was alive, that they had survived. But even as she rejoiced in this victory, she knew that the battle was far from over. They had defeated Cale and his followers, but the threat of the hunters remained, and the opposition of Rhys's pack was still a formidable obstacle. Rhys nudged her gently, urging her to shift back to her human form. He, too, began to transform, his body rippling and changing, his fur receding, his bones realigning, his human form returning. They stood facing each other, naked and vulnerable, their bodies bearing the marks of the brutal fight. But their eyes met, and in that gaze, they found a strength, a resilience, a love that transcended their physical wounds, their fears, their doubts. "Are you all right?" Rhys asked, his voice hoarse, his hand reaching out to gently touch her cheek. Eventha nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes," she said. "Thanks to you." He pulled her close, embracing her, holding her tightly, as if he were afraid to let her go. She buried her face in his chest, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that echoed her own. "I love you, Eventha," he whispered, his voice filled with a raw emotion that brought tears to her eyes. "I love you too, Rhys," she whispered back, her voice filled with a certainty, a conviction that she had never felt before. Their hearts, their souls, had reckoned with the danger, with the fear, with the forbidden nature of their love. And in that reckoning, they had found a deeper truth, a more profound connection, a destiny that was now undeniable. Their souls were awakened. Chapter 18. A tapestry of sacrifice and hope. The embrace lingered, a silent communion of two souls intertwined, two hearts beating as one. The ruins of the cathedral, a testament to past conflicts and shattered faith, seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the intimate space they created, a sanctuary woven from love and shared survival. But the reality of their situation soon intruded. They were still vulnerable, still exposed, still facing an uncertain future. They needed to leave this place, to find shelter, to heal their wounds, to plan their next move. Rhys broke the embrace, his gaze sweeping over Avant's body, checking for injuries, his touch gentle and solicitous. He found some scraps of fabric amongst the debris, remnants of old tapestries or priestly garments, and used them to fashion makeshift coverings for themselves, a gesture of modesty and practicality in the midst of their extraordinary circumstances. "We need to go," he said, his voice regaining its strength, its resolve. "We can't stay here. It's too exposed. And there are too many memories." Eventha nodded, understanding his unspoken words. The cathedral was not just a place of power, but a place of pain, a reminder of the violence and betrayal that had shattered the peace between humans and werewolves. They left the ruins, stepping back into the misty woods, the silence broken only by the soft rustle of their footsteps and the distant calls of unseen creatures. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts, grappling with the events that had just transpired, with the challenges that still lay ahead. Eventha thought of Cale, of his hatred, his violence, his determination to destroy their love. She felt a pang of sadness for the loss of his life, for the waste of his potential, for the darkness that had consumed him. But she also felt a sense of relief, of liberation, that he was gone, that he could no longer threaten them. She thought of Rhys, of his courage, his loyalty, his unwavering love for her. She felt a deep gratitude for his protection, his guidance, his willingness to defy his own kind for her sake. She felt a surge of love for him, a love that had been tested and strengthened by the fires of adversity. She thought of her own transformation, of her journey from a quiet, grieving widow to a powerful shapeshifter, a warrior, a lover. She felt a sense of awe at the changes that had taken place within her, at the power she now possessed, at the destiny that awaited her. Finally, she broke the silence. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Rhys glanced at her, a faint smile touching his lips.
"I know a place," he said.
"A safe place. A place where we can rest, heal, and plan our next move." He didn't elaborate, and Evan didn't press him. She trusted him, implicitly, completely. She knew that he would lead her to safety, that he would protect her, that he would always be there for her. They walked for several more hours, the mist gradually thinning, the sun beginning to rise, casting a pale, golden light through the trees. The forest seemed to awaken around them, the birds singing their morning songs, the squirrels chattering in the branches, the air filled with the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers. Finally, they reached their destination. It was a small, secluded cabin, nestled in a clearing, surrounded by towering trees and a babbling brook. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, a place of peace and tranquility, a refuge from the dangers of the world. Rhys opened the door, revealing a cozy, rustic interior. A fire was already burning in the hearth, casting a warm, inviting glow over the room. There was a comfortable-looking bed, a small table with 2 chairs, and a few simple furnishings. It was a haven, a sanctuary, a place where they could finally rest and recover. "This is beautiful," Evan said, her voice filled with a sense of wonder. Rhys smiled, his eyes filled with a quiet tenderness. "It's a place where I used to come with my mother," he said. "A place of happy memories. A place of hope." He led her inside, closing the door behind them, shutting out the world, the dangers, the uncertainties. They were alone, together, in this small, secluded space, surrounded by the peace and tranquility of the forest. He helped her remove the makeshift coverings, tending to her wounds with a gentle touch, his fingers tracing the lines of her scars, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and admiration. He bandaged her cuts, soothed her bruises, his presence a calming balm to her aching body and her troubled mind. She, in turn, tended to his wounds, her touch equally gentle, equally solicitous, her heart filled with a deep love and gratitude for this man, this werewolf, who had risked everything for her. She thought about how he had mentioned his mother, and it made her reflect on her own parents. She had been so young, so sheltered then. Now she was anything but. They were both exhausted, physically and emotionally drained by the events of the past few days. But they found solace in each other's presence, in their shared love, in their shared hope for a future that, despite all the obstacles, still seemed possible. A future, they both knew, that had only been bought through sacrifice. Chapter 19. The Night of Broken Chains, Forged Souls. The days that followed were a blur of healing, rest, and quiet intimacy. The cabin became their sanctuary, a place where they could shed their fears, their doubts, their burdens, and simply be themselves, 2 souls intertwined, 2 hearts beating as one. They tended to each other's wounds, both physical and emotional. They shared stories, memories, dreams, forging a deeper connection, a bond that transcended their different worlds, their different natures. They explored their love, their passion, their desire, finding solace and joy in each other's arms, in the warmth of their shared embrace. Evan continued to practice her shifting, honing her control, mastering the transformation between her human and wolf forms. Rhys guided her, patiently, lovingly, sharing his knowledge, his experience, his wisdom. She learned to embrace her inner wolf, to harness its power, its instincts, its wild beauty. She learned to find the balance between her human and wolf natures, to integrate them into a single, unified being. She also learned more about Rhys, about his past, his family, his pack. He spoke of his mother, of her courage, her kindness, her unwavering belief in peace and harmony between humans and werewolves. He spoke of his father, a strong and respected leader of the pack, who had been torn between his loyalty to his people and his love for his human wife. He spoke of his own struggles, his own doubts, his own determination to forge a different path, a path of understanding, of acceptance, of love. Evan listened, her heart filled with empathy and admiration. She understood the weight of his responsibilities, the burden of his heritage, the challenges he faced in trying to bridge the gap between two worlds that had been at war for centuries. As the days turned into nights, the full moon approached, the wolf moon, the very celestial event that had triggered Avant's awakening, that had brought them together. She felt a growing sense of anticipation, of trepidation, of power. She knew that this moon would be different, that it would amplify her abilities, that it would test her control, that it would reveal her true destiny. She also knew that the hunters would be drawn to her, to the power of the wolf moon, that they would be seeking to destroy her, to eliminate the threat she represented. Rhys, too, felt the approach of the wolf moon, the surge of energy, the heightened senses, the call of the wild. He knew that this would be a night of reckoning, a night of transformation, a night of choices. On the eve of the full moon, they stood together outside the cabin, bathed in the silvery light of the rising moon. The air was crisp and clear, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the faint, lingering aroma of something else, something magical, something primal. Evan looked at Rhys, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rhys met her gaze, his golden eyes reflecting the moonlight, his expression resolute. "We are ready," he said. "Together." He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. He led her towards the woods, towards the heart of the ancient forest, towards the place where their journey had begun, the forgotten hollow. As they walked, Evan felt the power of the moon growing stronger, surging through her veins, tingling in her limbs, awakening her inner wolf. She felt a sense of inevitability, of destiny unfolding, of a path that had been laid out for her centuries ago. They reached the hollow, the ruined structure standing silent and majestic in the moonlight, a testament to a past that was both a burden and a blessing. The air was charged with energy, with magic, with the presence of the ancestors who had walked here before them. Rhys released her hand, stepping back, giving her space. "It's time, Evan," he said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "Embrace your power. Embrace your destiny. Embrace yourself." Evan closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, focusing on the energy of the moon, on the power that flowed through her, on the connection she shared with Rhys, with her ancestors, with the ancient magic of this place. She felt the shift begin, the familiar tingling sensation, the pressure building within her, the transformation taking hold. But this time it was different. It was faster, smoother, more powerful. It was not just a physical change, but a spiritual one, a merging of her human and wolf natures, a blossoming of her true self. She opened her eyes, her vision now sharper, clearer, her senses heightened, her body transformed. She was a wolf, a magnificent creature of silver-gray fur and golden eyes, her form stronger, more powerful, more complete. But she was also Evan, a woman with a human heart, a human mind, a human love for the man who stood before her. She was both, and she was neither. She was something new, something unique, something whole. She looked at Rhys, her wolf eyes conveying a message of gratitude, of love, of acceptance. He smiled, his golden eyes reflecting her own, his heart filled with pride and admiration. And in that moment, as the chains were being tested one last time, she felt it. The snap. The silver cuffs, now darkened by the moon's magic, had broken. She was free, and their souls were forged together. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts. The snap of the breaking cuffs echoed through the hollow, a sound of liberation, of finality, of a destiny fulfilled. Evan felt a surge of power, a rush of energy, as the last vestiges of the ancient binding were shattered, releasing her from the constraints that had held her back for so long. She looked at her wrists, at the broken silver cuffs, now dull and lifeless, symbols of a past that no longer held any power over her. She was free, truly free, to embrace her true nature, to live her life on her own terms, to love the man who stood before her. But even as she reveled in this newfound freedom, she knew that the final confrontation was at hand. The hunters would be drawn to the power of the wolf moon, to the breaking of the cuffs, to the presence of two shapeshifters in this ancient, sacred place. And they were not the only ones. From the shadows of the surrounding woods, figures began to emerge, their eyes glowing in the moonlight, their forms shifting, transforming, revealing their true nature. Werewolves. Rhys's pack. They approached cautiously, warily, their gazes fixed on Eventha, on her wolf form, on the broken cuffs that lay on the ground. They saw her as a threat, an outsider, a human who had dared to trespass on their territory, to claim one of their own. But they also saw something else. They saw her power, her strength, her connection to the ancient magic of this place. They saw the bond she shared with Rhys, the love that radiated from them, a force that transcended their differences, their fears, their prejudices. Rhys stepped forward, his human form now restored, his golden eyes meeting the gazes of his pack, his voice calm but firm. "Brothers, sisters," he said, his voice echoing through the hollow. "I know you have questions. I know you have doubts. I know you have fears." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled werewolves, his expression resolute. "But I ask you to listen, to understand, to accept." He spoke of Eventha, of her human heritage, of her awakening as a shapeshifter, of the breaking of the ancient cuffs, of the destiny that had brought them together. He spoke of his love for her, of his commitment to her, of his belief that they could bridge the gap between their two worlds, that they could forge a new path, a path of peace, of understanding, of unity. His words were met with silence, with suspicion, with resistance. Some of the werewolves growled, their eyes narrowing, their bodies tensing, ready to attack. Others seemed hesitant, uncertain, their gazes flickering between Rhys and Eventha, their minds struggling to reconcile their ancient prejudices with the reality of what they were seeing, what they were hearing. Then, an old woman stepped forward, her hair white as snow. Her eyes, though aged, still held the piercing gold of her kind. She was the elder of the pack, a figure of wisdom and authority, her voice respected, her judgment trusted. "Rhys," she said, her voice raspy but firm, "you have broken our laws. You have defied our traditions. You have risked everything for this human." She looked at Eventha, her gaze piercing, scrutinizing, searching for something, some sign of truth, of sincerity, of worthiness. Eventha met her gaze, unflinching, unafraid. She stood tall, proud, her wolf spirit shining through her human eyes, her love for Rhys a beacon that illuminated her soul. The elder looked at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she turned back to Rhys. "But," she said, her voice softening slightly, "I also see something else. I see love. I see loyalty. I see hope." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the assembled werewolves, her voice filled with a quiet authority. "The old ways are not always the best ways," she said. "The ancient hatreds have brought us nothing but pain and suffering. Perhaps it is time for a change. Perhaps it is time to embrace a new path." Her words hung in the air, a challenge, a plea, a prophecy. The werewolves looked at each other, their expressions shifting, their doubts, their fears, their prejudices, beginning to crumble in the face of this unexpected wisdom, this unexpected hope. Slowly, gradually, they began to accept. They saw the truth in Evantha's eyes, the power in her presence, the love she shared with Rhys. They saw the possibility of a different future, a future where humans and werewolves could coexist, where love could conquer hate, where unity could replace division. The tension in the hollow dissipated, replaced by a sense of relief, of acceptance, of a new beginning. The werewolves approached Eventha, cautiously at first, then with growing warmth, their eyes filled with curiosity, with respect, with welcome. Eventha, in return, welcomed them, her heart filled with gratitude, with joy, with a sense of belonging. She was no longer an outsider, a threat, a stranger. She was one of them, a member of the pack, a part of this ancient, magical world. Rhys came to her side, taking her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. They stood together, united, their love a beacon of hope, a symbol of a future that was now within their reach. It was a confrontation of hearts and love won. The final chains had been broken. Epilogue. The years that followed were not without their challenges. The hunters remained a persistent threat, their hatred fueled by fear and ignorance, their determination to eradicate the shapeshifters unwavering. But they were no longer alone. They had the strength of the pack, the wisdom of the elders, and the unwavering love that bound them together. Some humans, touched by their story, inspired by their courage, began to open their hearts and minds, to question their long-held beliefs, to embrace the possibility of a different world. Some werewolves, witnessing the strength of their bond, the sincerity of their intentions, began to shed their ancient prejudices, to accept the possibility of peace, of unity, of love. The silver cuffs, once symbols of oppression and control, became relics of the past, reminders of a time when fear ruled, when hatred divided, when love was forbidden. They were displayed in a museum, a testament to the power of transformation, of forgiveness, of hope. Evan and Rhys had children, a blending of human and werewolf blood, a symbol of the new world they were creating, a world where differences were celebrated, where love knew no boundaries, where unity prevailed. Their children grew up strong, proud, and free, embracing both their human and wolf heritages, carrying on the legacy of their parents, working towards a future where peace and harmony reigned. The Forgotten Hollow, once a place of refuge and training, became a place of gathering, of celebration, of remembrance. Humans and werewolves came together, sharing stories, sharing meals, sharing their lives, forging new bonds, creating new traditions, building a new world. Evan and Rhys, their hair now streaked with silver, their bodies bearing the marks of time and battles fought, stood hand in hand, watching their children and grandchildren play in the moonlight, their hearts filled with a deep sense of peace, of gratitude, of love. They had faced their fears, overcome their challenges, broken the chains that had bound them. They had found their destiny, forged their souls, created a legacy of love, of hope, of unity. They knew that the fight was not over, that there would always be challenges to face, obstacles to overcome. But they also knew that they were not alone, that they had each other, that they had the strength of their love, the power of their unity, the hope of a brighter future. And as the moon bathed them in its silvery light, they smiled, their hearts filled with a quiet joy, a deep satisfaction, a love that would last for eternity. They lived together. The end.